Awesome. And we're live. So hi, welcome to the Reaction Community Call for April 4th. Today we have Spencer from Core and Jeremy and Michael from our community team. And before we get started with Jeremy, who's going to talk about his process for what we've been doing now is converting some reaction packages into NPM modules. We're going to just chat a little bit with Spencer on our latest release, 110. Spencer, do you want to give us a 2-minute update on it and where we're headed now?
Sure. So 110 was a release, I think it was probably right around the same time we had our last community call. We're coming up on our 111 release now. What we're focusing on, and I think what I would say the big piece of 110 is we're starting to develop our GraphQL API. So this is not ready for public consumption. I would highly recommend against using it in any way other than in experiments, but it is something that we're actively working towards right now. And in the 110 release, I think the first little bits of code to enable that started to trickle out. I think we have now in 110 a GraphQL endpoint, as well as a GraphQL endpoint. We don't have a ton of resolvers or queries or mutations yet. We have a few in 110. With 111, we're adding several new ones, and that will be the theme that you'll see going forward for our next several releases.
Awesome. And can you tell us a little bit about what, moving forward, what kinds of ways you could imagine people would be using the GraphQL API for?
Yeah, so I know internally, one of the things that we're excited about doing once we've separated or once we've added this GraphQL API endpoint is that we'll be able to separate out we'll be able to use Reaction kind of as a headless e-commerce system. So you'll be able to have a client app that is completely separate, does not rely on Meteor, and can fully interact with the Reaction Commerce backend as if it was just a true headless API. That will allow us to build several client front ends, client apps that can interact with our API, which I'm excited about. I think that will improve a number of things. One is going to be the development speed at which you're developing kind of on the client side.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Awesome. So we'll have more on that in the next future calls. And then let's go to Jeremy, who's going to talk about how he's been converting some of our reaction packages into NPM modules. Jeremy, you could take the screen.
I don't know of anything that I can show that would be all that interesting. So everyone will just have to look at my face. So the overall goal is to try and break down anything that can be separated into smaller packages and put them on NPM. So it's not bundled together with Reaction, and one of the big reasons for that is right now it's all one big app, and we kind of pre-package everything whether you need it or not. So the common example there is payment plugins. Chances are good you probably only need one of them, but by default you get all of them. So in an effort to make the app smaller, improve build times, not have unused code, all of that stuff. We're breaking them out into NPM packages so that they can be optionally installed by the users that need them and skipped otherwise. So with that effort, so the main complication behind that, and the main reason we hadn't just done this a long time ago or done it in the first place, was because of the nature of how Meteor works and how our dependencies are in the app. So there's a lot of Reaction APIs that these plugins use, internal Reaction APIs. And there's, in a lot of cases, there are Meteor APIs. And in most of these cases, there are Meteor APIs. So, one of the most common ones is Meteor methods. Almost all of these packages that have interaction between client and server, actually, all of the packages that have interaction with the client and server from the client to the server is using Meteor methods at this point until GraphQL is more complete. So there's a Meteor dependency in any of those packages, and Meteor is not on NPM. So that's how we ended up here. But the solution to that now is to do dependency injection and write the plugin in a way that that you pass Meteor into it when you install the NPM version of it, and then it can use Meteor or any other APIs it needs once it's inside your app. But it doesn't come packaged with Meteor. It depends on it. So one of the other things that we have as far as dependencies that we do have control over is any of these packages or plugins that depend on reaction APIs. We can take our reaction APIs and build those into NPM packages, so we don't have to deal with the complexity of dependency injection there. So the initial work that's been done so far here is I started with some of the simplest stuff that doesn't have any dependencies on anything outside of itself. So our custom logger that does all the nice formatted, colorful logging in your console. Our event hooks API, which is how you can configure all kinds of, you can configure callbacks to run at a bunch of different lifecycle events in the app. That is kind of a standalone thing, and there's actually nothing reaction specific about that. And then our schema API that pretty much anything that interacts with collections, has to either add a schema or get schemas, and that API is also pretty standalone. So those three packages are two of which the logger and hooks are already on NPM and technically already work, and the collections one is about to be this morning. And kind of the upside of all of these is because they don't have any outside dependencies on anything else, these could be used in any app. So you could use our logger in literally any Node app. And you can use our hooks if you like the hooks API. There's nothing that's reaction specific about that. You could totally install that in any Node app and use it the same way. Same thing for the schema stuff. So so that's where we started, was the most basic APIs that are not reaction or Meteor specific. Get those into packages. The smallest, the whole Unix philosophy thing, the smallest thing that does one thing and one thing very well, and get those all published as separate packages. And then in those particular examples, none of those are going to be optional. Those are pretty core pieces of how reaction functions on the server side. But they can, it makes things a lot more flexible. So that now also means that things like payment plugins, which depend on may depend on the logger and hooks and manipulating collections and schemas, now don't need that dependency injection that I talked about in the beginning. So there's probably a few other easy wins as far as those really small APIs with no dependencies that I'd like to hammer out in the near future as well. But those were the real easy ones to get out the door, and we're going to start. The next one going out is the example payment plugin, and that's going to serve as an example of how to do a reaction plugin on NPM that still has to deal with Meteor or reaction dependency injection. It's going to be kind of our not only example payment plugin, but example dependency injection plugin, and it's then after that we'll start moving the actual the real payment plugins and the shipping stuff and any of those ones. Basically anything that's in, for anyone that's familiar with the folder structure, anything in imports plugins included is theoretically an optional plugin. and the game plan is to get that to the point where none of those are in there anymore, and you install just what you need. And that should, that's not a huge amount of code, but it's a decent amount. And the other upside to that is, of course, any of those. So as it is right now, anything that has any of our plugins that have an npm dependency, that ends up in the root of the project in a package.json, and that wouldn't have to happen anymore. So, if you had a payment plugin, you have a Braintree payment plugin, it's installing the Braintree library, whether you use that or not. So moving that to NPM also moves out its NPM dependencies as well. So, while the plugin itself is probably, a few hundred lines of code or something like that, which is pretty trivial as far as app size goes, the Braintree library itself that does all the API interaction is probably more like a few thousand. So it starts to add up pretty quickly once you start removing optional packages like that. So hoping this goes a long way to improve performance and build time and all of that stuff, and just remove a lot of things that because nobody's using all of it. There's literally nobody is going to be using all of those things at the same time. So it should be an improvement for everybody, hopefully.
Awesome.
That's about it for me.
Thank you so much, Jeremy, on that. And I'm definitely looking forward to that reaction example. Payment plugin, NPM module. And so last but not least, we get this question a lot, and we haven't tackled it recently. I got this question just yesterday from somebody for the reaction community call. So I thought we should just go over it again. But somebody asked, how can I make my reaction dev environment and rebuild time faster? And we had a community forum answer from Lone. That was a really interesting one on how he tackled it, which was involved building reaction on a large AWS EC2 box, which is really expensive, but it works. But yesterday also we had a few reaction team members notice that there's been a Meteor issue on using the Meteor disable optimistic caching variable, and to set that as 1, I think by default it's set to,
it's probably just not set.
Yeah, it's not set at all, which would lower the number of times it does that. And it had, some people have been saying that their rebuild time has decreased a lot. Like the example poster said that theirs decreased by like 40 seconds or something like that, from 47 seconds to 8 seconds. So that's a really easy thing you can do. All you have to do is export that variable right before you start reaction, because just as a reminder, even though we've been talking about a lot of non-Meteor stuff, the reaction CLI is basically just like a wrapper over Meteor. So any tip that you see on Meteor, you can usually use for reaction. So that would be our number one easy tip for how to get your rebuild time faster. Yeah, I know, Michael, you said that you've been experiencing that it's been a lot faster. Have you been doing anything else?
Yeah, exactly. So performance of reaction has been the hot topic, I guess, for the last couple of months in our community. It pops up all over and again and again. So I think all people here at Reaction are definitely aware that the current situation was and is not really good. So I always had the hope that there's some kind of magic toggle that would allow us to get back on track. But that just seemed kind of ridiculous. I didn't believe it really. But now it turns out really that there is really kind of a magic toggle. I think it should help everybody of us who had these bad experiences. It's for sure not, it's just a part of the whole story, of course. But I think you should try it. It's a issue that popped up in the Meteor GitHub tracker. I guess some of our community members actually found it. And basically it describes that projects with huge code base and a lot of files, they suffer from excessive file polling, which somehow slows down, boggles down the whole application and leads to the phenomenon that we really experience, that very long rebuild times. This is because somehow it polls files if they have changed, and apparently it also watches files that even don't exist at all or don't exist any longer. So they figured out basically that the variable you have said, it's an environment variable called Meteor disable optimistic caching set, really does speed up the things. Now the thing is, actually, I don't know exactly what this thing is doing under the hood, but at least I have, like many others, have experienced that it really helps and improves our load times. I also have made this observation, like you told, or you have said, from something like 40 seconds for the rebuild down to 8 seconds or 10 seconds. So I think it's worth a shot. And yeah, so definitely try it out.
That's awesome. So yeah, definitely try it out and let us know how it's going for you. It should work no matter what version of Reaction you're on, in case you're wondering.
I think a lot of this problem started with Meteor 1.6 too, right? Or, you know, 1.6.1, whatever the latest minor release was for them, because it definitely, you know, this is not entirely new, but it seems like it got quite a bit worse once we hit 1.6, and yeah, it's kind of a bummer. So that's good that there's at least a temporary solution, but that also points to some extent that you know, this is the Meteor build tool. I mean, we have a large app here, and things like breaking out packages are going to help do that. But when the only thing that changed is a Meteor version, that definitely does point to Meteor being a big part of the speed problem there. So hopefully that doesn't stay that way for too long.
Yeah. And I just wanted to note that, you know, here at Reaction on the core team, like our community team, and even just the office as a whole, we're always talking about kind of performance on different timelines, whether it's small refactoring things we can do or just also Reaction's roadmap as a whole. And this is like improving development build time, whether it's in our current iteration now or in the future, kind of what Reaction will look like in the future is like one of our top priorities. So even if you feel like you're being redundant, like keep asking us those questions and pressuring us to kind of come up with new things. And we'll also be kind of as transparent as possible on how we're trying to improve things on our side from like the day-to-day perspective and the long-term perspective. So yeah. And if you ever want to ask a question to us for the community call, we have a Google form that you can fill out. And that's linked in our agenda and also in our kind of our show notes agenda and in our YouTube caption thing. So thanks a lot, Jeremy, Spencer, and Michael, and we'll see y'all in 2 weeks. Bye.
See ya.